AI in healthcare, it's everywhere these days, right? Faster diagnoses, personalized medicine. The promises are, well, pretty huge. But can we really trust it? I mean, when it comes to our health, accuracy is everything. And that's what we're diving into today. This whole idea of medical hallucinations in those big, powerful, large language models, the
Yeah,
LLMs.
medical hallucinations. It does sound a bit sci-fi, doesn't it? But it's a real thing. These AI systems, as amazing as they are, can sometimes spit out stuff that sounds totally believable, but it's just plain wrong. And in healthcare, that's a problem, a big one. So today, we're going to try to understand these medical hallucinations, what causes them, what are the implications, and what's being done about it.
And to do that, you pointed me to some fascinating research, a paper titled Medical Hallucination and Foundation Models and Their Impact on Healthcare. It seems like this paper covers a ton, from classifying these hallucinations to analyzing experiments and even surveying clinicians. So let's break this down.
Right. And it's really important to remember that healthcare is a tricky area for LLMs. I mean, think about it. Medicine is constantly evolving, and precision is crucial. Plus, all those medical concepts, they're all interconnected. And the language, well, let's just say it's not exactly everyday conversation. All those factors combined make healthcare a pretty unique challenge for AI.
Okay, so first things first. What exactly are we talking about when we say medical hallucinations? How are they different from, say, just a regular AI getting something wrong?
Great question. So the paper defines medical hallucinations as these outputs from LLMs. They seem reasonable, in a clinical setting, but they're actually inaccurate. And what sets them apart from other AI errors is that they directly relate to medical practice. And this is the scary part. They have the potential to actually harm patients. Imagine an LLM hallucinating a symptom that the patient doesn't have, or saying a drug is FDA approved when it's not. Those aren't just abstract errors, they have real-world consequences. So even seemingly simple medical facts, you can't just take them for granted when dealing with these models. Verification is key.
Yeah, the stakes are definitely much higher when we're talking about someone's health. Now, this paper lays out a visual taxonomy of these medical hallucinations. Can you walk us through those main categories?
Sure. So they've identified 5 main clusters of these errors. First up, we have factual errors. This is where the LLM just gets the facts wrong. It might contradict known medical knowledge or even contradict the information you gave it in the first place. They break this down further into non-factual, factual, and input conflicting hallucinations, depending on the specific type of error.
So, like in Table 1, there's an example where the patient explicitly says they don't have leg swelling, but the LLM summary includes it anyway. That would be input conflicting, right?
Exactly. Or they give another example where an LLM claims a certain drug has FDA approval when it doesn't. That's a factual hallucination.
Okay, got it. What's next?
The second category is outdated references, what they call memory-based hallucination. This is when the LLM relies on old guidelines or data that's just not current anymore. It's like the model is stuck in the past, pulling from its training data, which may not reflect the latest medical understanding. Keeping these models up to date is a huge challenge.
Yeah, especially with how fast medical knowledge changes, that's a bit worrying.
No doubt. Then we have spurious correlations. This is where things get a bit more complex. Here, the LLM is messing up the relationships between different bits of data. It might merge things incorrectly, misinterpret data, leading to conclusions that are just plain wrong. They've got bias-induced, amalgamated, and multimodal integration hallucinations under this umbrella. It's not just about getting individual facts wrong. It's about creating these entirely new, incorrect links between medical concepts. And that can be really hard to catch and potentially dangerous.
Can you give an example of a spurious correlation?
Sure. Table 2 gives a nice example of an amalgamated hallucination. An LLM might say that drug X is FDA approved for condition Y. But in reality, maybe drug X is approved for something completely different, or condition Y has a different treatment altogether. The model is essentially making stuff up, connecting things that shouldn't be connected. And for multimodal integration, they have a case where a CT scan correctly identifies a lesion on the liver, but the LLM, looking at the image, says there's no problem with the liver. That's a misinterpretation of different types of data.
Yeah, those kinds of mistakes, I mean, that could have serious consequences. What about the last two categories?
Okay, so the fourth one is fabricated sources or guidelines. Here, the LLM is going beyond just getting things wrong. It's actually inventing stuff. It might describe a medical procedure that doesn't exist or misrepresent research findings. They call these procedural and research hallucinations, respectively.
So, like, if an LLM claims there was a phase 3 trial with a 95% success rate for some new therapy, but that trial never actually happened.
That's it. That would be a research hallucination. And that kind of fabrication can really mess with how doctors evaluate treatments. And lastly, we have incomplete chains of reasoning. This is about faulty logic. The LLM might make errors in its reasoning process, leading to bad decisions or even misdiagnoses. They have reasoning, decision-making, and diagnostic hallucinations in this category. Like Table 1 had this example where an LLM identified the lung as the biggest organ in a CT scan instead of the liver. Basic anatomy gone wrong, and that's a fundamental reasoning error.
Wow, that's quite a comprehensive and frankly, a little scary breakdown. It's interesting how some of these AI errors seem to mirror the cognitive biases we see in human clinicians.
You're right, that's a fascinating parallel the paper brings up. Now, LLMs don't have human psychology, obviously, but the way they learn from all that data can actually lead to outputs that resemble cognitive biases. Take anchoring bias, for example. A doctor might give too much weight to the first thing they learn about a patient. And in an LLM, this could look like focusing too much on the beginning of a prompt and ignoring crucial details that come later.
What about confirmation bias, where we tend to favor information that supports what we already believe? How does that show up in an LLM?
Well, the paper suggests that confirmation bias might appear when an LLM's answer leans heavily towards the user's implied hypothesis, even when the data contradicts it. Or availability bias. We tend to overemphasize things we've seen a lot recently. And an LLM might do the same, suggesting diagnoses that were common in its training data, even if they're not the best fit for the case at hand.
And what about overconfidence or jumping to conclusions too quickly?
Overconfidence is a big problem with LLMs. They can be wrong and be super confident about it at the same time. This can really mislead users who naturally trust that confidence. And it's similar to premature closure in humans. A doctor might settle on a diagnosis too soon without considering everything. An LLM might do the same, jumping to a conclusion without fully analyzing the situation. It's like these LLMs are learning, statistically, to mimic human mistakes.
That's pretty mind-blowing. You have to wonder if understanding these parallels could help us design better AI systems or build safeguards against those errors.
Absolutely, and that's a major focus of current research. By understanding these statistical echoes of human bias, we can look at how we mitigate those biases in humans and see if those strategies apply to LLMs. For example, prompting doctors to consider alternative diagnoses might give us ideas for prompts or techniques that encourage LLMs to explore more possibilities before giving an answer. Or we could encourage LLMs to express their uncertainty, which could address the overconfidence issue. So the hope is that by learning from human mistakes, we can make more robust and reliable medical AI.
That makes a lot of sense. So these medical hallucinations, they're not just theoretical, right? What are the real-world clinical implications we should be concerned about?
Right, the implications are pretty serious. First and foremost, it's about patient safety. Incorrect recommendations or misdiagnoses, they could lead to delays in treatment, interventions that aren't appropriate, or even harmful interventions. Even seemingly small errors can have a knock-on effect, especially if they reinforce a doctor's own biases.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. What else?
Another big concern is the potential for erosion of trust. If doctors and patients keep seeing these medical hallucinations, they're going to start doubting AI systems altogether. And that could really hurt the adoption of these tools, even the ones that are actually beneficial.
Makes sense. If you can't trust the information, you're not going to use it.
Exactly. And then there's workflow disruption. If doctors are constantly having to double-check and correct AI-generated information because they're worried about hallucinations, that's just adding to their workload.
Yeah.
It's taking away time they could be spending with patients. This goes against the whole idea of AI making healthcare more efficient.
I can see how this also raises a whole bunch of ethical and legal questions.
Oh, absolutely. As LLMs become more involved in medical decisions, the issue of accountability becomes huge. If a medical hallucination harms a patient, who's responsible? The people who built the AI, the doctor who used it, the hospital that implemented it. The current lack of clarity about legal liability could really slow down the adoption of these technologies and make things very complicated if something goes wrong. And finally, hallucinations also impact precision medicine. If we can't trust AI to give us accurate insights about individual patients, the whole promise of personalized treatments takes a hit.
So let's get down to the root causes. Why are these medical hallucinations happening in the first place? Is it the data these models are trained on, the models themselves, or is healthcare just a uniquely difficult domain for AI?
The paper breaks down the causes into those three main areas: data-related issues, limitations in the models themselves, and specific challenges of the healthcare domain. Starting with data-related causes, one major issue is the quality of the data and all the noise that comes with clinical data sets. Think electronic health records, doctor's notes, things like that. You've got incomplete entries, typos, ambiguous abbreviations. All of that introduces errors into the training data, and those errors can end up in the LLM's outputs. Another problem is outdated information. Medical knowledge is constantly updating, and if the training data includes stuff that's no longer accurate, the model might learn those outdated practices. And finally, the size and scope of the data matter. General LLMs might not have been exposed to enough of the specialized language, the complex concepts, and the rare conditions we see in medicine. This creates knowledge gaps and increases the chance of hallucinations when the AI encounters something unfamiliar.
So it's that classic garbage in, garbage out thing, but with AI. What about the models themselves? What are the issues there?
One key issue is overconfidence and poor calibration. LLMs often give incorrect answers with a high degree of certainty, and their internal confidence scores don't always reflect how accurate they actually are. This can lead people to trust wrong answers. Then there are limitations in the model architectures. Most LLMs are mainly learning statistical patterns and correlations in the text they're trained on. They're not really doing deep medical reasoning, integrating symptoms and diagnoses and treatments in a logical way. This reliance on statistics, rather than true understanding, can lead to outputs that sound right, but are based on shaky logic.
And finally, what are the challenges specific to healthcare that make it so prone to these hallucinations?
The medical field is just complex, plain and simple. One issue is ambiguity in clinical language. Like we said before, an abbreviation like BP could mean blood pressure or biopsy, depending on the context. LLMs can easily get tripped up by that kind of ambiguity. And then there's the fact that medical knowledge is constantly evolving. Keeping these models updated with the latest research, guidelines, and diagnostic criteria, that's a massive ongoing task.
So we know these hallucinations are happening. What are people doing to detect and evaluate them?
The paper talks about a few different strategies. One basic approach is factual verification. This is basically checking the LLM's output against trusted medical sources. It can be automated, looking for overlaps in medical concepts, or it can involve manual verification by expert clinicians. This is especially good for catching factual and research hallucinations.
That seems like a logical starting point. What else is being done?
Another important strategy is consistency analysis. This looks for contradictions within an LLM's response or across different parts of a conversation. They use techniques from natural language inference and question-answer consistency to spot instances where the model might contradict itself. That can be a red flag for reasoning or decision-making hallucinations. Then there's uncertainty-based hallucination detection. The idea here is that hallucinations are more likely when the model is less sure of itself. They use different methods to measure this uncertainty, like analyzing the probability of the generated text or measuring semantic entropy. Low probability or high entropy, that could mean a hallucination is more likely.
So if the AI seems hesitant, that could be a warning sign.
Exactly. And then we have cross-modal verification. This is specifically for multimodal integration errors. It involves checking whether the text descriptions from the LLM actually match up with the medical images or other data they're supposed to be describing. So if the LLM says there's something in an image but it's not really there, this method would catch that.
It sounds like researchers are trying to attack this problem from all angles. But are there any big challenges when it comes to detecting these medical hallucinations?
Definitely. One big challenge is that the term hallucination itself is kind of ambiguous. There's no one agreed upon definition, which makes it hard to create standard benchmarks and compare different detection methods. Even once we have a clearer definition, we need to develop metrics that are specific to healthcare, that can assess these complex reasoning processes in a medical context. Solutions like frameworks for checking if radiology reports match up with medical images are helpful, but we need more of those.
Okay, so we can detect them. What about actually preventing them? What's being done to stop these medical hallucinations from happening in the first place?
There's a whole range of strategies, and the paper groups them into data-centric approaches, model-centric approaches, and external knowledge integration. Let's start with data-centric approaches. The focus here is on improving the quality of the training data. That means cleaning up the data, removing noise and duplicates, and making sure it aligns with current medical guidelines. Datasets like Metatron 70B and MedCPT are examples of these curated datasets designed for specific medical tasks, aiming for greater reliability. Another data-centric strategy is augmenting the data. This means adding more clinically relevant information to the datasets, helping the models fill in knowledge gaps and generalize better. Things like patient trial matching models, LLM for synthesizing data from images and text, and Gatortron GPT for generating biomedical text are all examples of this.
So the idea is better data in, better results out.
That's the basic principle. Then there are model-centric approaches. The paper mentions advanced training methods and post-training techniques, though they don't get into specifics there. But they do highlight the importance of external knowledge integration. One key technique is retrieval augmented generation, or RAGE. This involves bringing in external medical knowledge when generating an answer. The idea is to ground the LLM's responses in verified and up-to-date information, hopefully reducing hallucinations based on its internal knowledge, which might be outdated or flawed. But it's important to note that RAGE effectiveness relies on the quality of the retrieved information and the model's ability to use it properly.
So it's not a foolproof solution?
Not always, no. Another crucial external knowledge technique is using medical knowledge graphs, or KGs. These are structured databases with tons of information about medical concepts and their relationships. By connecting LLM outputs to these KGs, which are verified and structured, we can potentially reduce incorrect or made-up content. KGs show a lot of promise in areas like diagnosis, image analysis, chronic disease management, and making sure medicine recommendations are safe.
That sounds promising, having the LLM check its work against a solid base of medical knowledge.
It is. The paper also stresses the importance of uncertainty quantification. This is all about getting the LLM to estimate how confident it is in its answers. If it knows when it's unsure, it can avoid giving potentially wrong information or at least flag that its answer might not be reliable. This is especially crucial for important medical decisions and in specialties where there's less training data available. There's also this idea of multi-LLM collaboration, where different LLMs cross-check each other's work, kind of like a second opinion but from another AI. This could help reduce bias and improve reliability.
Like getting a second opinion, but from another AI.
You got it. Finally, there's prompt engineering. Designing prompts in a clever way can guide the LLM toward better answers. There are techniques like interactive self-reflection, where the LLM checks its own knowledge, semantic prompt enrichment, using biomedical entities to give the model more specific instructions, and the chain of medical thought approach, which helps the LLM create structured reports by breaking down its reasoning step by step.
It really seems like we need a multi-pronged approach to tackle these hallucinations. Now, the paper also mentioned some experiments using the MedHalt benchmark. What were the main takeaways from those?
Those experiments were all about testing different hallucination mitigation strategies on different LLMs. They compared models like O3 Mini, Gemini, Metatron, and MedAlpaca using different prompting strategies like chain of thought and internet search. One interesting finding was that newer, more advanced models tended to be more resistant to hallucinations right out of the box, and they only needed simple chain of thought prompting to improve further. Older models, or those specifically trained on medical data, sometimes needed other approaches, like incorporating information from the internet.
That's surprising. You'd think the medical-specific models would be better.
Right, but that's what the research showed. They also found a strong link between how similar the LLM's output was to the correct medical information and its resistance to hallucinations. The best-performing models tended to have high semantic similarity, while medical-specific models sometimes had lower similarity and more hallucinations. This suggests that a good understanding of the medical concepts reflected in that semantic similarity is really important for accuracy in reducing errors.
What about the part where physicians analyzed NEJM case records? What did that show?
That was a really valuable part. Physicians looked at LLM responses to questions based on real case records from the New England Journal of Medicine. They focused on 3 tests: chronological ordering, lab data understanding, and differential diagnosis. Interestingly, the hallucination rates differed depending on the task. Diagnosis prediction had the fewest errors, while tasks that involved remembering details and integrating information over time, like chronological ordering and lab data understanding, had more inaccuracies. For example, in chronological ordering, LLMs often missed details, like a patient's history of opioid use, or forgot important medication info. In lab data understanding, they sometimes failed to report abnormal lab values that were clearly in the record.
So it seems like the LLMs were better at the bigger picture diagnosis stuff, but struggled with the basic facts and the timeline of events.
That's a good summary. It shows that while LLMs can be good at recognizing patterns and suggesting diagnoses, they still have trouble accurately pulling out and putting together the specific details from complex medical text.
The paper also included insights from a survey of healthcare professionals. What were their thoughts on medical hallucinations?
Yeah, the survey gave us some real-world perspectives from the people actually using these tools. It found that AI and LLMs are already being used a lot in both medicine and research. But The level of trust in these tools was mixed. A lot of respondents said they had personally encountered medical hallucinations when using AI for things like reviewing research or making clinical decisions. When they did encounter inaccuracies, these clinicians said they double-checked the information with other sources or talked to colleagues.
So they're not just blindly trusting the AI.
Definitely not. The respondents also share their thoughts on what might be causing these hallucinations. They mentioned things like insufficient or biased training data, limitations in the models themselves, the lack of real-world context in the models, and overconfidence in the AI's answers. They also highlighted the biggest limitations of current AI tools, pointing to the lack of deep medical knowledge and accuracy issues as main concerns. But even with these limitations, they were mostly optimistic about the future of AI in healthcare. They stressed the need for better accuracy, more explainability in how the AI reasons, and careful consideration of the ethical implications. And they suggested safeguards like having humans double-check the AI's work, providing human supervision, and using confidence scores to flag potentially unreliable outputs.
So it seems like the healthcare community is excited about the possibilities, but they're also aware of the risks and limitations. Now, we haven't really talked about the regulations and laws surrounding AI in healthcare. What's the situation there?
That's an area that's changing quickly. In the U.S., the FDA regulates AI-driven medical systems as software as a medical device, or SaMD. The level of regulation depends on the risk of the device. High-risk devices need pre-market approval, while lower-risk ones might be eligible for a faster clearance pathway. The FDA also has guidelines on good machine learning practices, or GMLP, to ensure AI is developed and used safely and effectively in healthcare. Professional organizations like the AMA also have guidelines focusing on transparency, physician oversight, and patient safety when using AI tools. And of course, any AI system that handles patient data has to follow IPO regulations for privacy and security. There are international standards too, like ISO 13485 and IEC 62304 for quality management and software safety in medical devices. Even President Biden's recent executive order on AI touches on safety and oversight in healthcare, aligning with broader frameworks like the OSTP's blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights and NIST's AI Risk Management Framework, which provide principles for responsible AI development and use across all sectors.
So there's a regulatory framework starting to take shape, but the paper also mentions unique challenges with generative AI like these LLMs.
Yeah, generative AI systems like LLMs are different. They're what we call stochastic, meaning they can give you different answers even with the same input. And that makes it harder to definitively say whether their outputs are right or wrong. This potential for plausible but incorrect information, like medical hallucinations, is a big concern for regulators.
What about the legal side? If someone's harmed because of a medical hallucination, who's liable?
That's a very complicated question, and there's no easy answer yet. Traditional medical malpractice law focuses on human error and negligence. A doctor is liable if they deviate from the standard of care, and that harms the patient. But when an AI is involved, things get murky. Who's at fault? The AI developer, the doctor who used the AI, the hospital. And many AI systems are black boxes, meaning it's hard to understand why they gave a certain output. That makes it even harder to prove that a specific action or inaction directly caused the harm.
So our current legal system might not be ready to deal with AI errors in healthcare.
That's a big challenge right now. Legal experts are looking at a few different approaches. They're considering how existing laws on negligence and malpractice might be extended to include AI, adapting product liability laws for AI systems, or even creating new risk-sharing frameworks where responsibility is shared among the different players involved. There's also a lot of talk about needing clear guidelines for informed consent when AI is used in diagnosis or treatment, making sure patients understand the role of AI and the potential risks. Having these clear legal frameworks is crucial, not just for addressing harm if it happens, but also for building public trust in these technologies and ensuring they're used ethically and responsibly.
This has been a deep dive, and I have to admit some of it's a bit unsettling. But it's so important to understand these issues as AI becomes more and more common in healthcare. What's the key takeaway you want listeners to remember?
The main takeaway is that while LLMs have huge potential in healthcare, medical hallucinations are a serious challenge. They could have real consequences for patients. But it's equally important to remember that a lot of brilliant people are working on this. They're trying to understand why these hallucinations happen and develop ways to detect and prevent them.
So what's the message about the future of AI in medicine, given these challenges?
The future of AI in medicine is bright, but we have to be careful. We need to keep testing these systems rigorously, make sure human experts are still in the loop, and build strong ethical and regulatory frameworks. That's how we'll make sure these powerful tools ultimately make healthcare better and safer for everyone.
That's a great message to end on. So, as AI takes on a bigger role in healthcare, here's something for you to think about. How will the roles of patients and doctors need to change to ensure that medical information and decisions, which are increasingly influenced by AI, remain accurate and trustworthy? It's about striking that balance between embracing new technology and holding on to the core values of healthcare: patient safety, ethical practice, and the essential human element. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.